Hey everyone, it's time to wrap up the Civil War. I know you're getting sad about that. And we're only about a week until the end of the school year is over. So who's crying? But we have talked about the Blue Jackets and how they are a dominant force during the Civil War. Ulysses S. Grant in the upper right, William Tecumseh Sherman are the prominent Blue Jackets from Ohio who will help Lincoln win the war. So as we wrap this up this week, just keep in mind this is the greatest challenge really the United States has ever faced. We're fighting ourselves and just ripping our country apart, trying to decide what it would be like to be a citizen. Would only white people be citizens, or would this war level the playing field for everyone? At least a major step in that right direction. So keep that in mind as we wrap up the Civil War. But when we last talked about this, we'd wrapped up Gettysburg. The Union defeated the Confederates at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and that is pretty much the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. From that point on, President Lincoln likes what he sees in General Grant. Remember, Grant was fighting out west at Vicksburg in Mississippi and asked Grant to be the head of the entire army. He likes what he sees in Grant. Grant's able to win. He is unconditional surrender Grant. In fact, his initials are U.S. Grant, and some people would say unconditional surrender Grant, but really it's Ulysses Grant. So by the time we get to 1864, it is the end, really, of the Confederacy. And not only does Lincoln put Grant in charge, but he also says to General Sherman, I want you to help Grant, you two Blue Jackets, help defeat the Confederacy. So by the time we get to 1864, the new strategy is total war, meaning that, for example, William Tecumseh Sherman, wherever he takes his army, he will destroy everything. Burn everything, eat all the food, burn the barns down, burn the houses down, just destroy everything in your path. So if you look at the map on the screen now, you see the red line from Atlanta, Georgia to Savannah. That is the path that General Sherman would take. It's the most famous part of his campaign of total war, to go from Atlanta to Savannah. And Savannah's on the ocean, right? So his march to the sea is what historians have called it. So all along the way, his men would eat and burn and slash and just break the spirit of the Confederacy. And even today, there's a lot of issues with William Tecumseh Sherman and the way he waged the war through Georgia. While he's doing that, General Grant is invading Virginia, and the idea is just to march everywhere through the South and just destroy them. And in the midst of all of this, it looks like the Union is going to win, and so Abraham Lincoln is reelected president in 1864 as the war is winding down. So Grant and Sherman help Lincoln secure re-election because the North, the majority of the states, realize that the war is almost over thanks to the Blue Jackets. So that brings us to 1865. In 1865, the capital of the Confederacy is captured by General Grant, and then he moves to one last little battle with Robert E. Lee, and Robert E. Lee's troops lose, and he surrenders at a place called Appomattox Courthouse. It's not actually a courthouse. The actual town is named Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. And this famous painting of Robert E. Lee surrendering to the Blue Jackets, Grant and his crew of generals and officers that helped him win. So the Confederacy is defeated. The Union has won, but it has been a bloody and terrible war. If you were to go to the South today, many parts of the Confederacy, the old Confederacy, there's still many statues honoring Confederate generals. And so it's become kind of a hot button issue whether or not those states should honor their Civil War leaders, or if it is really just a symbol of a racist past. So every small town in the South probably has some statue of a general or someone who fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. And you could turn on the news and watch people debate whether or not those statues should come down. And I'll try to include a little bit of video of that from the news over the last couple years, where you can just see the tension between trying to make sure that we don't honor racism, but also respect what these men did in the past. And it's more of a southern state issue. Obviously we don't have to deal with it in Ohio or in the northern states. The most famous symbol of the Confederacy, that is probably the largest, I would say, is in Georgia. If maybe you've been to Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain, Georgia is a massive mountain of granite. It's, I think, the largest piece of exposed granite on planet Earth. And in the side of that granite, the southern states, the state of Georgia, has carved into the stone 3 prominent Confederate leaders: Jefferson Davis, who's the president; Robert E. Lee, who is in the middle there; and finally on your right is Stonewall Jackson. Now, this particular carving in the mountain is larger than Mount Rushmore. And so it is a giant carving. In fact, a human, if you could look on the right there, you could stand inside the nostril of one of those horses. That's how big the carving is. Now, this is not on public property. It's privately owned, so no one's going to come in and say it needs to be taken down. But people can kind of see it both ways. Now, today at Stone Mountain, Georgia, there's an amusement park and a train. You can hike to the top of it, or you can take a cable car to the top of Stone Mountain. You can watch fireworks there. It's a kind of a place where a lot of people celebrate, but it is, honoring the Civil War leaders from the Confederacy. There's a zoom in, I guess, of the statue, so you can see just the Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Stonewall Jackson, and the horses and how big it is. People protest there all the time, but mostly what you'll see on the news are smaller statues in a town square that's on public property, and taxpayers don't want the slave-holding war heroes to be honored anymore, yet some people do. So it kind of divides many of these southern communities. So just make sure you stay tuned for the video link about Stone Mountain and all of that. But let's go back over some of the big basics. We talked about these battles. Fort Sumter was the first battle. First Bull Run was really first real glimpse of what this war was going to be like. Antietam was super bloody, and after Antietam, that's when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. But the biggest, most epic battle of the entire war was at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 3 days in July. About the same time, Ulysses S. Grant is dominating out in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and showing that he is the one Lincoln wants to put in charge. And right after that, Sherman marches through Georgia and destroys it. Remember, he marches from Atlanta to Savannah. And finally, Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia in 1865. So the war is over, but not everybody is happy about it, right? There are many people in the South who want to keep fighting. There's just really no way to do it. So what I'm about to tell you now, you may have heard of before, but to me, it is almost beyond comprehension that this actually happened. So there was one last plan. All right, John Wilkes Booth, you may have heard of him, right? He's the one who would go on to kill President Lincoln. He is the most famous actor in America at the time, right? They had only the theater, so it's not like he was a movie star, but it was their equivalent of a movie star. So imagine Tom Hanks or Tom Cruise, or you name the movie star at that level. Like, he was the most famous. He was from Virginia and did not want the South or the Confederacy to surrender. So he hatches a plan. The first plan was just going to be about kidnapping, but he and his friends decide that wouldn't be enough. So what they decide to do is that John Wilkes Booth would kill the president, somebody else in his group would kill the vice president, and somebody else in the group would kill the Secretary of State, all at the same time. So like at 10 o'clock on a Friday, they knew Lincoln was going to be going to a play, and they knew where the vice president would be staying, and they knew the Secretary of State where he was at. Actually, the Secretary of State, Seward, had been injured in a carriage accident, similar to being in a car accident. So he had a neck and back brace on, and he was confined to his bed. So the plan was to kill Lincoln at the theater, kill Vice President Johnson, and kill the Secretary of State all at the same time, and it would throw the Union into chaos. And maybe, just maybe, the South, the Confederacy, would be able to survive and keep fighting. Well, the way it worked is the person who was supposed to kill the vice president chickened out, couldn't do it. The person who was supposed to kill the Secretary of State, when he kicked in his door to his room and started stabbing him, he kept hitting the brace with the knife. This is not made up. This is all true. So the knife kept hitting the metal and the wood of the brace, and he would later survive. But of course, Lincoln would not survive being shot at the theater by John Wilkes Booth, point blank range, while Lincoln watched the play, Our American Cousin. That's the name of the play. So Lincoln would be shot. They would take him across the street to a little house because they didn't think they could move him to the White House from the theater. And they thought he would not make it. He would die. They moved him across the street to a little room in a little apartment, and he died the next morning. So maybe we'll post some stuff about the assassination of Lincoln as well this week for you to watch, because it's an amazing turn of events that they were trying to take out the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of State all in one fell swoop. And only John Wilkes Booth succeeded in killing Lincoln. So as you wrap it up, your studies of the Civil War, I want you to think about some of the thoughts and things you've learned. The thing you're going to turn in for a learning activity would be a Civil War collage. So step one, either select the Union or the Confederacy. All right? It's not hard to do this. Just some of you will think you can put both, but you're really supposed to pick either the Union or the Confederacy. So if you go with the Confederates, you use images and words that convey the Confederacy. You pick the Union, you use Union images. So in other words, you're not just doing a Civil War collage. You can't put an image of Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee in the same collage because they were on two different sides. So I'm thinking 17 to 20 images and 4 words. So they could be words like struggle or whatever, but 4 words worked into your collage. So you either pick Union or Confederate and then start looking for images of your side. And you can share those with me about this time next week, probably early on next week. If you have any questions, of course, you can email me. But I'm also going to post a few videos about statues and things, and maybe Stone Mountain, and maybe some stuff with Lincoln's assassination later on in the week. But for now, just start thinking about your collage and be ready to share that with me early next week.